Senator Merkley.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much, Director Patel. And so, as I understood it, you testified yesterday that you'd like to have another $1 billion added on to the FY25 level to do the additional work you'd like to do on drug interdiction, fentanyl in general, and anti-terrorism. And today you gave us a budget that requests cutting $500 million. Which is it? Do you want us to, what are you asking of this committee? To add funds, add $1 billion, or to cut $500 million?
Welcome back to the channel, The Constitution Corner, where America's roots guide its future. If you still believe in the Constitution, if you believe that law enforcement should be about justice, not politics, then hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and turn on notifications. Because today we're talking about something that should shake every freedom-loving American to the core: the absolute erosion of constitutional responsibility at the highest levels of our federal law enforcement.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate the opportunity. What I'm asking for is that with more, I can simply do more. And I was giving examples of what more I could do. I can do the mission and am in support of the budget here. And I'm working with appropriators and you to fill the gaps.
So you support the budget presented that cuts $500 million, but you also support us adding $1 billion should we choose to do that?
Well, I can't not support the budget as proposed, because then I would be supporting no budget.
Okay. Well, we've got those two options. We do look forward to further details from you about how you plan to modify the function of FBI on these different missions that you've highlighted today, so that we can give it the appropriate consideration. Director Patel, you're familiar with the Fifth Amendment.
Yes, Senator.
And it is really the freedom clause of the United States. It was 4 years into being a nation when Congress and the states said, hey, we have to make sure that there's not an over-aggressive government in the future that deprives us of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And you're familiar that that applies to all persons in the United States.
Yes, Senator.
So there's been a lot of concern about the several hundred immigrants who were swept off the streets of America and sent to El Salvador without due process. And does that concern you?
Senator, I'm not in a position to comment on whether or not they were given or not given due process or are supposed to be afforded due process. All the FBI did and all the FBI will continue to do is arrest those that have violated the law.
Okay, but to arrest, you have to investigate. Have you launched an investigation of this violation of the Freedom Clause of the U.S. Constitution?
Senator, I don't know that I agree with your characterization.
Well, that was my first question, whether or not you agree with the Fifth Amendment and are prepared to defend it. It is your job to investigate crimes.
Yes, I agree with the Fifth Amendment. I agree with the entire Constitution, and the men and women at the FBI decide.
So are you going to launch an investigation of the reported violation of the due process of several hundred individuals?
Again, Senator, it's not for me to call the balls and strikes on it. The men and women at the FBI who are trained to open investigations will make those calls.
So you have no influence over whether an investigation is opened?
I have influence over it, but you're asking me a constitutional question. I'm not a constitutional scholar.
Well, it's actually not it's a question also of law.
But your position is that every one of those individuals is by constitutional right afforded due process. I don't know the answer to that. I'm telling you.
You haven't read the Constitution?
It
says all persons.
I've got it right here, but what you're saying is that every single one of the illegals that was sent down to El Salvador is supposed to be given due process pursuant.
Yeah, that's what the Constitution says. It says no person.
It doesn't say that.
It does say no person. Yeah, I'll encourage you to read it, because it's also been affirmed by the Supreme Court repeatedly. In the case of Miranda versus Arizona, held the right of all individuals, regardless of citizenship status. The Supreme Court in Reno versus Flores. I mean, but it's the plain language of the Constitution. It concerns me that you're not familiar with the core concept of due process applying to all persons as written in black and white in the Constitution.
As the first public defender who's ever served at the FBI as its director, I am more aware of due process than any predecessor in my seat. You are delineating between removal proceedings and criminal acts. My job is to investigate criminal acts. That's what we do.
You are aware that the Fifth Amendment refers to taking away liberty, and when people are arrested on the street, detained and sent out of the country, that their liberty has been taken away.
Senator, that is a constitutional question that you are asking me to answer. It's not for me to answer.
The question has already been answered by the Supreme Court that they're protected, therefore it's a violation of law, and it's your responsibility to open an investigation, and you're saying today you will not do so?
I am not the agency involved in removal proceedings. That is a different branch of government.
So if an agency other than the FBI violates the law and the Constitution, you will not investigate because it's a different agency?
I will investigate every violation of law.
Well, you have, but you just said you're not investigating.
No, you and I are in disagreement on what is a violation of law. I have yet to hear from the Supreme Court your position as you have adjudicated it.
Well, very, very interesting, because the Supreme Court's been very clear, and I had heard you were trained in the law, so I expected maybe you would try to uphold it. You also took an oath to the Constitution.
Thank you for the reminder.
Well, it's important to remind you, since you're apparently unfamiliar with the very basics of the core protection of freedom in our Constitution.
What I am familiar with is protecting the American public, and that's what
Let me close with one question, Mr. Chairman. Will you make sure that due process in every action of the FBI is completely honored under your time as director?
Will I ensure that due process is followed?
Yes.
Under the Constitution?
Completely. Send that message throughout the FBI that due process must be followed, is constitutionally required. Make sure that it's done under your direction.
Sure.
Great. Thank you.
Senator Murkowski.
This hearing between Senator Merkley and FBI Director Patel wasn't just a debate. It was a moment of truth. It was a moment where the rubber met the road and the head of the FBI was asked one of the most important questions any public servant can be asked. Will you uphold the Constitution? Let's start with the facts. Senator Merkley confronted Director Patel about allegations that several hundred illegal immigrants were swept off the streets and deported to El Salvador, without due process. Now, whether you agree or disagree with deportation is not the question here. The question is whether anyone in this country, regardless of immigration status, is afforded their Fifth Amendment right to due process before the government strips them of their liberty. Patel couldn't give a straight answer. He tried to dance around it. He said he supports the Constitution. He said he believes in due process. But when pressed on whether or not that due process applies to everyone, including non-citizens on American soil, he froze. And when asked if he would launch an investigation into potential violations of the Fifth Amendment, his answer was effectively, no. Now let me tell you something, patriots. This isn't about defending illegals. This is about defending the rule of law. If the government can come for someone else without due process, what's stopping them from coming for you? What's stopping them from declaring you a domestic threat and hauling you away without a hearing? Let's be clear, Director Patel claims to be the first former public defender to run the FBI. You'd think that would make him more protective of constitutional rights. But what we saw instead was someone dodging basic questions about the Fifth Amendment, passing the buck, and refusing to take accountability. He even said, and I quote, "That's a constitutional question and I'm not a constitutional scholar." Are you kidding me? You're the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and you're telling us you don't know whether or not the Fifth Amendment applies to persons in the United States. Let me help you, Director. The Fifth Amendment says no person, not no citizen, shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The Supreme Court has upheld this over and over again. From Miranda to Reno versus Flores, it's been made crystal clear. And yet, the guy who oversees the FBI doesn't think it's his job to investigate if a law was broken, because it might involve another agency. Let me ask you something, America. Since when does the FBI ignore a crime just because another agency committed it? If the IRS agent breaks the law, shouldn't the FBI investigate? If a Department of Homeland Security official violates the Constitution, shouldn't the FBI care? This is what's wrong with our system right now. These bureaucrats are more interested in protecting their own than protecting the American people. They're more afraid of stepping on the toes of another agency than they are of violating the Bill of Rights. It's cowardice. It's corruption. And it's a disgrace. Senator Merkley asked a simple question. Will you commit to ensuring that due process is respected under your watch? And even then the answer was lukewarm. Sure, Patel said. Not yes, not absolutely, just sure. That's not good enough. This is why people are losing faith in their government. When the very agencies created to defend the law start ignoring it for the sake of politics or agency turf wars, we lose the soul of the republic. Here at the Constitution Corner we stand for something different. We believe in holding every government agency accountable. We believe that the Constitution is not optional. And we believe that due process is not just for the privileged, it's for every single person under American jurisdiction. Because if the government can ignore the Constitution for one group, they can ignore it for all of us. So what can you do? Share this video. Call your representatives. Demand that Congress investigate this incident. Demand that they hold the FBI accountable for refusing to investigate potential constitutional violations. And subscribe to the Constitution Corner to stay informed, stay alert, and stay ready. We are the last line of defense between liberty and tyranny. And we're not backing down. We are the Constitution Corner, where Americans' root guides its future. Until next time, stand strong, speak truth, and may God bless the United States of America.